So shifting gears here now, let's go back to, you're talking about Twitter, you're talking about people, how you're engaging. Here's a question. What else stood out most to you about this election? Does it make you hopeful or not? That's from Hannah on Twitter. Are you hopeful or not? Because sometimes, my gosh, deplorable might be the nicest word that people on either side would use, especially if you're looking at the comments section, for instance.
I guess it's not about who wins the White House that would determine whether I'm hopeful or not on November 9th. The thing that concerns/saddens me most is how much people here take the act of voting for granted, right? There are a lot of people who sort of brazenly say, I'm sitting this one out. I really can't stand this person or that person. And I kind of, want to say back to them, do you realize how many countries on earth don't have this opportunity? Especially if you're in a, battleground state, so to speak. And even if it's not in a presidential election, even if it's the local election in an off year, in fact, there's probably a lot more influence and impact that you have on the local school board bond measure, the levy that's passing or not, because there might only be a few hundred people that show up. I mean, it might be a bit dictatorial of me, but I think that voting should be mandatory. I mean, I can't, let's just say I want you to go get the sticker at the polling booth, as long as you're physically able to. You don't have to vote. Your choice can be to abstain. But I think it's an incredibly small price to pay at least once every 4 years to participate in what is still arguably the greatest democracy on the planet.
You mentioned immigrating with your parents as a child. Does that inform that opinion somewhat, give you a better appreciation?
Yeah, I mean, I came from the biggest democracy in the world to the oldest, right? So it's really something that it's a parliamentary system there, and they have gridlock in different ways as well. But I'm always amazed by the fact that more than 1 billion people wake up in India every day, and somehow they identify themselves as Indians, even though, imagine, if you will, people in St. Louis looking completely different than the people in Oregon, speaking a totally different language, praying to a different God, eating different foods, right? And still waking up and saying, I'm an American. Well, that's what happens in India on a daily basis, that we have so many different languages, so many physically different types of people, and yet there's something that binds them together, and there's a sense of togetherness and connectedness, and I think we have that in the United States as well. I think in cycles like this, which seem incredibly divided and polarized, we seem to forget that we actually helped people figure out that patriotism.
It seems like we're splitting into two different camps more and more every day. Is that hard as a journalist to walk that line and to give equal time and to dot all those I's that you were talking about before, especially when one candidate says things that in a previous election, would have been headline news multiple times a day, that would have carried the news cycle for several days previously?
Yeah, I think that there isn't a sort of this abstract notion of objectivity, and I think what we should strive for more often than not is just fairness. And it's not about equal time, and it's not trying to make sure that there's a negative light cast on both candidates or a positive one. I think you cover what's being, what's out there in the ether. But what's also been very difficult for this, the media in this cycle, is is almost a recognition that they're being played at their own game. That essentially if you tweet at 11:30 at night or midnight, you know that the morning shows are going to pick it up and talk about it, and you essentially could win another cycle.
So is the media not kept? Are we not smart enough? Did we get outplayed on this cycle? We've got a learning curve to catch up to.
I think there's definitely, it's fair to say that. I mean, and I think shows like the NewsHour have a totally different kind of luxury, and that we don't necessarily have to say that that is the driving force of the day. It's because we're not we're still focused on one program in the afternoon or the evening, and while we publish online, we're not in as much of the horse race mode as a lot of commercial media and certainly cable media are. There are new polls that come out every day, and that's not necessarily the story for us. There are a lot of other stories we did on this weekend's broadcast. We focused on education, partly because it was American Graduate Week, but also because we think it's important. We focused on what was happening in Syria because that is consequential. And to sit there on the day-to-day for too long is actually a disservice to our viewer, because that kind of gets back into this very myopic, let's focus only on this little horse race and forget about the rest of the world. I think if we can help people see more of what's going on in the world, we actually empower them as smarter American citizens.